Hello there. Good afternoon. Lyndall Fraker here with Marshfield Old School Times. Going to go solo today. No guests here today, but I'm going to take some time and I guess, talk about some things on my mind. Number one, though, I want to talk about all of the previous guests we've had on the show. I've had quite a few people request that we kind of run by, or rehash folks that we've had and maybe the dates they were on. So they could go back and look at previous podcasts, and I've never really taken the time to do that. So we're going to take time to do that today. Logan, thank you for setting us up. He's got to go play pinball. By the way, here today in the community center at the Retro Zone Arcade, we have a huge pinball tournament, and the boys have really grown those tournaments. They reach people as far as St. Louis with those. How many you got down there today, Logan?
26.
26 entries, which is really good, but there's a lot of people, guests and friends, and so it's a very active um, area down there. Also, of course, this I think is the last day of this season's basketball, Marshfield basketball program here in the gym. Hundreds of people in the gym, and it's been an outstanding year for that program. For those of you that don't know, we're honored to have the city leagues here for basketball and volleyball, and I think indoor soccer, and they utilize our gym very, very well on the weekends. Also use it certain times throughout the week for practices, and we really appreciate that. They're one of our biggest users, and of course that helps us to pay the bills. Most of you probably know that utility bills continue to increase, and we had the highest bill last month we've ever had here, and of course I think the next one coming will be high as well because of all of the cold weather. So it is tough to keep all the bills paid, but we do our best, and it's because of the users of the facility, the leases, the rentals of the depot, banquet hall out back, which has been a very, very profitable entity for us as far as helping pay the bills. We'll have 5 to 6 rentals on a weekend back there in the old band hall that most of you know it as, and we call it the depot, and then the bounce room behind it. So it's very, very important that we continue to lease our space and you know pay the utility bills mainly. We are a not-for-profit entity. The Marshfield Community Center is, and we do not accept, or don't we don't we'd probably accept it, but we don't have any tax revenue that comes in other than what the city pays us for the user fees on the gym. So we pretty much operate on user fees. We do have a signage program over in the gym that we try to ask sponsors, city businesses, and so forth to help us with to help supplement that. And you'll be seeing your letter pretty soon. It's that time of year again to renew those signs. But other than that, it's a self-standing entity based on user fees, and then we have some rental, some space here in the building that we rent out to some businesses such as the donut shop. Most of you are familiar with. Very successful. They have a good product, and they're open on Thursday. Or I'm sorry, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday mornings. And they also, besides donuts, have some other items like kolaches and biscuits and gravy, and so they have some hot food over there as well, and then coffees and so forth. We have some folks that rent some other space from us, mainly office space, up on the third floor, on the second floor, and we sure appreciate again all of those that help us to pay the bills. So today I wanted to talk. Number one, as I mentioned, I want to go over the schedules of the previous guests and who we had on and when we had them on. I'll briefly maybe talk about it. Don't want to take up too much time. But I did want to mention our theme song is written by Dennis Beck, Marshfield High School class of 1975. And Dennis, this is going to be the 50th anniversary of their class graduating from this building. Actually, they were the last class to graduate from this building. So it's kind of a special year this year. But we appreciate, Dennis. You're supposed to pay residuals if you're using a song of someone or whatever. And of course, we got permission from Dennis to use his song, and so we are always happy to promote that. And in honor of that, I also wanted to show you this Beck's Milky Way Dairy milk bottle. Now, I'm a little bit young to remember when Warren Beck used to bring the milk to the back porches of the homes in Marshfield, but many of you that watch obviously will remember those days in the 50s and early 60s. But this one happens to have the little cap on top, the clean fresh milk cardboard cap, which you don't find too often, and it's got the carrier here. But it's a very special piece of memorabilia that I'm very happy to have. Um, and of course Dennis's dad and Roy Howard and Vicky and Charlotte's father, Frida was his wife, and they had a fine business out here on at that time I guess they called it City Route 66, and also Highway 38, and it's where O'Reilly Automotive is. And Warren was just kind of a legend in this community, as most of you that knew him know that. After he retired from well, I guess he went to work for Highland Dairy after his own business. He sold his own business or got out or sold to Highland or something. Maybe we can have one of the Becks on when they're in town sometime and talk about it. Then he stocked the shelves at the grocery stores working for Highland, and that's when I remember him as a kid. He always called me Goober. I had a nickname that some people called me. I think my dad started when I was a kid, and Warren was one of those adults that as well called me Goober. So I can remember his tone of voice as he would see me in the grocery store or somewhere on the ball field or wherever. And just a great man. And then after he retired, of course, he was responsible for helping start the recycling program here in Marshfield, and the former recycling facility out here in the industrial park is named for him. It was the Warren Beck Recycling Center. So unfortunately, that's no longer in operation, and I wish it was. And I hope someone some of these days can start a recycling program back up in Marshfield. We desperately need it. We put way too much cardboard and products in the dumpsters, which go to the landfills. So anybody listening that wants to do that, I'd certainly support that. So the first podcast we had was on July the 1st of 2023. So we're going to be coming upon 2 years here before too long. And our first guests happened to be two good friends of mine, Pat Barr, who graduated in 1973, and they were having their 50th anniversary of their graduation here in the Depot building, along with Reunion Fest. That was Reunion Fest weekend. And then Eric Hall, my good friend, my good childhood friend, who probably knows as much about Marshfield history as anyone that doesn't live here and hasn't lived here for 45 years. But Eric, he's just kept in contact with a lot of us and was just a great neighbor and friend in the days when he and his family, his mom and dad, Bill and Jackie, lived here. And it was great to have Eric and Pat on as first guests, because there was a lot of knowledge about growing up in Marshfield and going to school in this building. And of course, Pat's dad was the superintendent here, Mr. Barr, R.A. Barr, for umpteen years, principal before that. So that was a great time and a great way to kick off our podcast series. The second week was July the 8th of 23. Eric Burke and Dean Whitty, and both of these guys graduated in 1976. I went to school with them. They were a year ahead of me, but both just, as Dean Whitty's last name would attest, they were both just very witty characters. And we had a great time. Probably told a lot of jokes that day, but probably not all we could have, because they probably wouldn't have been very fitting for the audience that we have that watches the show. But many of you that know those two guys can recall, and it helped us to remember many of the great times we had together running around Marshfield back in the day. Eric was kind of a town city rat and grew up on the streets of around the square, and we all spent a lot of time together in those early years, of course, before we grew up. On the next week, we had Hoover Case and Bill McFadden. Hoover and Bill both graduated in the late 60s, 68, 67, and they're both very instrumental in the Historical Society. And of course, Hoover, as all of you know, comes from a great family, the Case family, and unfortunately, just this past week, lost his brother, Mac Case, who was another legend in our community. Maybe provided more heat and air conditioning for anyone in the history of Marshfield, and certainly is going to be missed. Has a great family and three daughters, and of course his lovely wife Karen, and they're mourning his loss at this time. His service actually is Monday. But we had a good time that day with those guys, and again a lot of information with Bill being involved in the historical society as well. On July the 22nd, then of 23, we had Don and Leona Roast. Both graduated from MHS in 1949, and they very well could be the longest surviving graduates of Marshfield that are still married or that are still both a living. And so they've I think they're both maybe around 92 or 3 or 4. I can't remember for sure, but certainly are still living at home and doing great. And they happen to be my aunt and uncle, and I'm very proud of them. And we had a good time talking about the old days in Marshfield. The next podcast we had was actually on August the 5th. And on that particular date, we had Brett Lamar, who owns the donut shop down here, and they were just opening. It was their grand opening. We also had Landon, my son, Landon Fraker, who at the time, we just opened the arcade, and that was the big weekend, grand opening weekend. We also talked a little bit about the history of this building, so that's a good one if you want to go back and hear a little bit more about the history of this particular building. The next podcast was August the 12th of 23, and this was Stan and Julie Whitehurst. Stan graduated from Marshfield 84, and Julie went to Niangua. We don't hold that against her because we need some good Niangua representation here, and she's a good one. Talked a lot about what they've done in their lives, and Stan, as the county clerk, has an awful lot of knowledge of Webster County, and had a great visit with them. On August the 26th of 23, we had Linda Blazer, Linda Dickinson, the two Lindas. Linda Blazer graduated in 61, Linda in 1970, and they both represented the Webster County Historical Society. Again, talked a lot about their group and some history about Marshfield. Enjoy them, and I need to have them come back because there's a lot of stuff there that can still be covered. On September the 2nd, John Dale Evans and Larry Scott both attended Marshfield schools. Larry graduated in 1973, so that was his 50th year that year. And they both actually were maintenance men in this building. And John Dale led the maintenance team at Marshfield schools for, I can't remember how many years, but I think he spent his whole career at Marshfield schools basically, and was about 50 years as a janitor for Marshfield. Just an amazing guy, and everybody that grew up and went to school in Marshfield in that era knows John Dale, and he, I think, spent time in about every building. But he was the director of maintenance in his toward the end there, and did a great job. Larry Scott spent a lot of time just in this building as the maintenance guy. So they told us a little bit about the building and where the bodies were buried and so forth. On September the 9th, I'm sorry, September the 16th was our next podcast. We don't catch every Saturday. I've got some other things I have to do in life sometimes. So on the 16th, we were very blessed to have, I think maybe the oldest graduate we've had on our show, Pat Abbott, who graduated from MHS in 1944. And if you do the math, I believe Pat's going to be 99 years old in September of this year. And she is a remarkable lady that had a business on the square for 50 years in Marshfield, the Style Shop. Also, her daughter Susan, who graduated in 76, was there with her that day, and we had a great time. And I've told one of my favorite stories on this show in almost in over a year and a half now has been the story of when Pat and Bob got married, and they didn't get to see each other for 8 or 9 months, and then they spent a weekend together and didn't get to see each other for another 8 or 9 months. And being part of that greatest generation, it's a remarkable story, and she's had a remarkable life with a wonderful husband and two great daughters. So it was a good time, and I'd recommend, if you haven't watched that show, you be sure and watch it. What I wanted to mention to you though was, if you go to iTunes, and I'm sorry, YouTube, not iTunes. Go to YouTube and you type in Marshfield Old School Times, and then type in their name and the date, or just the name or just the date. It may bring it up, but if you do both, I think it'll come up a little easier. September 23rd of 2023, Pat and Susan Abbott, something like that. It should pop up for you where you can review those particular episodes. On September the 30th, we had on Caitlin McConnell with the Ozarks. Drawing a blank on what the name of her show is. Ozarks Alive, is that right? Caitlin is a unbelievable young lady that has done so much for sharing the history of the Ozarks. Um, Hang on here, and I'm going to tell you. I want to get this right. Yes, Ozarks Alive. You can go to ozarksalive.com and hear and read all about Caitlin and her program that she has on the internet now, and she's been involved with a lot of historic information, doing feature stories about iconic uh, places in the Ozarks. So I highly recommend that you review that show. On the next weekend was Mike Cunningham on October the 7th, my good friend who, as you know, served as our state representative and state senator. And we talked a little bit about serving in the House together and our time in Jeff City. And for me, it was a great show and a good time to reminisce. And of course, his grocery store was an iconic facility here in town that everybody, knew and shopped at and enjoyed being able to patronize. On October the 14th, we had Nicholas Inman, who graduated from Marshfield in 2000. And Nicholas talked about the Cherry Blossom Festival and all of the other various things that he's involved in, the Mansfield Laura Ingalls Wilder Museum and various things. So I'll probably have Nicholas on again to talk about this year's Cherry Blossom Festival. It's always good to hear what new and exciting things they are doing to bring tourism and bring folks into Marshfield. On the 28th of October, we had Susan Newcomb and Christy Jones. Christy Lewis Jones graduated in 76, Susan in 74, and Susan just had their 50th reunion this past summer. And here at the Depot building during a reunion fest. But they both talked about growing up in Marshfield and being two, as I say, two of Marshfield's finest athletes up till the point that when they were going to school, I don't think we had Title IX yet. And so there wasn't a lot of opportunities for young ladies to play sports, but they were both very good. And my most famous memories of Susan growing up as a kid is she always got selected to play ball and be on the team before I would or other young guys because she was just a lot better ball player when we played sandlot baseball over at the Hubble Elementary Playground in those days. We had on November the 4th of 2023, Champ Heron, and Champ graduated in 1994. Champ's an interesting guy, and most of you know he's just done a lot of things with the history of not just Marshfield, but just in general of the Ozarks, and grew up. He's another one that says he was kind of the town rat. Marshfield raised him, not necessarily just Barbara and Klein, but he was raised by the town, and he's an interesting guy, and we'll have him back on as well. We actually had him back later on and talked about the Masonic Lodge. On November the 11th of 2023, we had Tom Farr, and then we had Tom back again on the 25th. We skipped a week, but we had him on twice because Tom graduated from Marshfield High School in 1948, actually with my dad in his class. And Tom is now 95, and he is a remarkable person, someone that has a memory that's better than mine is, and appears to be in excellent physical condition. He still is a wood carver and teaches that class to some folks. And we had him back here about a month ago or so, and we did a road trip around Marshfield, and it was so much fun. And he's promised that he'll come back, and we'll do that again and go a little bit further out. We rode around town. He talked about the old days, his time frame growing up, and where things were, and businesses and people, and highly recommend that you watch those shows. November the 11th of 23, November the 25th of 23, with Tom Farr, and I promise you, you will be entertained and you'll learn something. On December the 2nd, we had Larry Roast, who graduated from Marshfield in 1962. Larry married Katie Greer, and they moved away after high school, went to college, and then went on and was a teacher, a VOAG teacher, and then got in the banking business, and were very successful in the banking business over in Illinois. Moved back here when they retired, live on the family farm out just down the road from me. And Larry's a very interesting gentleman that has a lot of history knowledge of Marshfield, of banking industry, of the banking industry in Marshfield, the C notes that the banks produced back in the day. And then he also has done a lot of work with abstracts and learning about property and who owned property back in those days. Just a great historian and has spent a lot of time at the Historical Society and doing research on that. And then I had Larry back again to even go a little bit further with some of that information. On December the 16th, we had Wayne Martin, who graduated in 1960. Wayne worked basically his entire career for Webster Electric. And again, one of those guys around town that everybody knows that kind of kept the lights on for Marshfield, along with some other guys in that era of growth for our community. And we appreciated having Wayne on. Then after Wayne, on December the 30th, Mr. Jim Jones graduated in 1967. Jim was our county assessor for several years, 25 years or something like that. I can't remember for sure, but it's a long time. And then, before that, he worked at Marshfield Machinery. Jim was one of the most well-known guys in Marshfield and Webster County. And generally, when he was on the ticket in an election, he got more votes than anybody. Of course, he's got a big family. Comes from a long line of folks that have, born and raised here, and still live here. But Jim, I think, unless it's changed, I believe is my most viewed episode of all that we've had. And so very entertaining, good joke teller, and can kind of keep you in stitches, and had some great stories. Had a lot of fun. Then moving into 2024. January the 6th, John Black, our state representative. John graduated actually from Stratford High School in 1970, but we got a good update on what was going on in Jefferson City, which is certainly a part of history, and got to know John a little bit better. Lived here for 30 plus years, but it's always good to get to know folks even a little bit better. And of course, now his wife Cynthia is one of our judges. On January the 13th, I had my cousin Ben Fraker and Gary Price. Now that's Beach Gary Price, because there's a few Gary Prices, but those two graduated from Marshfield 1969. I knew they'd have some stories about this building because I've heard many of them at the Saturday morning breakfast table. Some of them couldn't be told, and I think I found out on that particular Saturday that they couldn't tell more than they told. But we had a great time, and of course, my cousin Ben, just almost about a year exactly after that, passed away, and we've been mourning his loss ever since. We miss him a lot. But Gary Price, Jack Hartman was supposed to come on with him that day, and Jack ended up being out of town. But Jack and Gary both, and I've had a chance to reminisce some about Ben, and again, I believe Ben's the only guest that I've had that has passed away at this point. So we miss him a lot. January the 20th, I had Dr. Ralph Todd. Doc Todd graduated from 1954 from Marshfield. Another one of those iconic legends of Marshfield that comes from a great family that have served the public here. And Doc Todd, sharp, very great stories, good memory. He's in his late 80s, and I see him again every Saturday out at Grillo's usually, and he always has a positive comment to say. He's a very positive, optimistic person that I like being around, quite frankly. We had a good time. I'm going to have him back on because he's got some more stories to tell me about every time I see him. He's got something else he'd like to share. On January the 27th of 2024, we had the Young Boys, and that was Ellis, John, and David Young from Beach, Missouri. All of you know him. David was our county collector for several years. They all graduated in 58, 65, and 63 respectively. And they've great family. Of course, talked about Uncle Carl and Glessy, then the grocery store, and their folks owning the country store out there at Beach. And well, we had a good time that day, and I'd love to have them back as any time. And of course, they have a sister, but she didn't make it, and we invited her, but we didn't get her on that particular day. But we'd love to have her. Let's see, on February the 3rd, Paul Ipock, our county commissioner, presiding commissioner, graduated from Seymour High School in '73, and we reminisced about Webster County and growing up in Seymour, and his dad over there, Frank Ipock, and mother were legends in that community, and as well as he is also. I had a good time with Paul, and of course I worked with him a couple of years in the courthouse years ago, so I enjoyed having him. On February the 10th, then, we kind of started our little series of civic clubs and the history of civic clubs. We had the Rotary Club represented by Cynthia Black, Stan Whitehurst, and Chris Robinson. That was February the 10th of 2024. We talked about the history of the Rotary Club, which is, I think, was chartered in like 1968, something like that. And a lot of Marshfield business people have been in the Rotary Club over the years. Back in those early years, they had 30, 40, 50 members at one time, and done a lot for Marshfield, including the Rotary Park out here, where they were responsible for getting the gazebo started or built, and the playground equipment initially put in that park. And so a lot of other things since then, the walking trail and the bridge down there, and just upgrading the park. On February the 17th, I had my cousin Scott Fraker on, and Scott, pretty well known in the Branson community, being a part of various shows. He's a tremendous musician, a vocalist, and we enjoyed having Scott and talked about his life and his wife Marcy and their children, and his time being in Branson. And now he's a realtor down in that area, and lives over at Stratford. On February the 24th, we had the Lions Club. Junior niece Kevin Cantrell, Bart Tibbs, and talked about the history of the Lions Club. And of course, the Lions Club is Webster County's oldest civic club, and I think they're pushing 100 years old now. I can't remember the exact date, maybe in the 30s somewhere, but that was a good time. And again, the Lions Club have done so much. Back in the mid 1900s, the Lions Club, anytime, whether it was the fair, whether it was the 4th of July, whether it was any kind of a community activity, the Lions Club were very instrumental in helping provide labor and helping put those events on. And they've been around, again, doing that for many years. On March the 9th, we had Champ Heron again, and this time he talked about the history of the Masonic Lodge. And again, Champ's just well read and understands more about history in detail probably than many of us. He has some great stories, and he's kind of a soothsayer and a storyteller anyway, so it was great. On March 23rd, we had our state senator Curtis Trent. Actually had two shows that day. We had Curtis on for an hour, and then we had D. Lewis and my brother Barth come on, and Mr. Lewis was remarkable. Another legend that served in our community. All of their children graduated from Marshfield, and it's a show you would definitely want to look back up. That was March 23rd of 2024. Curtis happened to talk about what was going on in Jeff City on the Senate side, and that was the day of the Webster County Lincoln Days that day. And so I was glad to have him to come on. People get to know him a little bit better. On April the 6th, we had Diana and Lionel Hudspeth. And of course, Diana is the daughter of Doc Campbell. Doc served our community for decades as the optometrist, you might say. Maybe the only one for many decades, until Dr. Newcomb, Dr. Kramer showed up a few years later. Diana was a great guest because she really had great memories of growing up as a young girl in Marshfield, living close to the square, hanging out around the square, walking to school, going to the square for lunch, all those kinds of stories, which I really enjoyed. And then Lionel, by the way, was a good ball player, and wasn't a native here, but she certainly made him a part of the community. On April the 13th, Rick Siebert, Mark Birchfield represented the Marshfield Optimist Club. And of course, Mark comes from an old family, and Rick been here since the early '70s and or late '60s, and so we had a good time. Optimist Club do a lot for children, probably as much as any group or organization for the kids over the years. That's their thing, and we appreciate them. And they've actually helped us here at the community center with some skates. We have a roller skating program over in the gym, and it costs a lot of money to keep skates going. One pair of skates is over $100, and so they wear out pretty quickly. And so the Optimist Club, a couple, 3 times, have helped us to buy some skates for the kids to enjoy. We really appreciate that. On April the 20th, I had Larry Roast back, and again talked a little bit more about the things that we mentioned earlier, the bank history of banking, and the abstract and the history of Webster County in those ways. On April 27th, I guess that was the only other time that I did a show by myself, but I talked about my mom and dad. It was kind of dedicated to them. I've got some pictures and information hanging up in the room here. A lot of information that are great memories for me and my brothers, and I was able to have Barth call in on the phone from Springfield, and we just reminisced a little bit and shared a little bit about the Roast and the Fraker families, and it was a good time for me, and hopefully some of you enjoyed it as well. All right, so that brings us up to April the 20th of 24. And I am going to move over to this other stack here, if I may. I'm sorry, April the 20th was Larry Roast, yeah, and then the 27th was my mom and dad. And then on April the 30th, we talked with Bill and Neva Schroeder. Bill and Neva were up from Texas, and they came in for the Cherry Blossom Festival, and so we had them in on the 30th, and had a really good visit. Bill and Neva are a remarkable couple. They really are. They raised their children here, and Bill had a great career at Show Me Power, and Neva was involved in school growing up with the kids and PTA, or whatever they call it now, and that kind of thing. And we just had a good time. I think the thing that's most remarkable about them is their desire to continue to spend time with each other on the dance floor at their ages, and continue to get it done in their mid to late 80s. And so it's really a true love story, if you really want to know the truth. And that's what I find with them. On May the 11th, Andy Moore graduated from Marshfield 1995. Andy is part of a group called the White Oak Revival, and Andy's been around here all of his life, as I mentioned, 95, but he's kind of the go-to guy for sound if you're putting on an event. And he does the Webster County Fair. He's in this band. They play all over in the Ozarks, and and the season begins here soon. They played Reunion Fest. They're going to play again this year at Reunion Fest. He does our sound and our lighting at Reunion Fest. And so we really appreciate Andy. But I think the other thing is he just has a remarkable story as a child growing up. I think he would tell you he was raised pretty poor, and I think maybe lived in a school bus for a while, and something that had been built, revived for that. And so anyway, it's a neat story. It's kind of a rags to riches story, if you will. And he's got 2 fine young men, 2 boys that he's that helped raise. And so I think it's a good one to watch if you're interested in Andy. On June the 8th, had a little bit of a break then from May 11th. And then on June the 8th, I talked with Tom Barnes. Tom graduated from Marshfield, I believe, in 1960. Another one of those old Webster County families. His dad was George and Jean. They had the Spur Cafe. They had the Main Course Cafe over at the golf course a few years. Was married to Linda and raised 2 boys, and just another one of those really nice people that was successful in life because of how they acted and who they were and the way they carried themselves. And he was very involved in the Optimist Club, very involved in their church, and really enjoyed having Tom on. And uh, would love to have him back. So on June the 15th, we had Keith Stewart, who graduated from Marshfield 1981. Keith is part of the group Bell Ford, and of course, a lot of people knew Keith's mom and dad, Wilburn and Clara, and his sister Brenda, and a other family that basically lived their whole lives here in Marshfield. Wilburn worked for Show Me Power, and Keith, with his wife and daughter Angie and his daughter, they've made lifelong Webster County residents. But he's a fine musician, and Bell Ford has done a lot of shows and a lot of events around the Ozarks, Springfield, Marshfield area. And we'll have them back at Reunion Fest whenever they want to come. So appreciate that. On June the 22nd, we had our school superintendent, Mike Henry, on. And Mike was an Ava boy, and graduated in 1997 from Ava. And but he's been our superintendent now a couple years, and just a really good person, and I'm really glad that Mike Henry is our school superintendent. I believe he's a good Christian man, and I believe that he really wants to see our schools succeed, and has a great communication with the teachers and the patrons, and appreciated having him on and getting to know him a little bit better. On June the 29th, my old schoolmate and his brother, Andy and Craig Hosmer. Craig and I graduated from MHS 1977. The Hosmers, of course, their mother, Mitzi, another legend. Their dad was John Hosmer. Their grandfather was old John Hosmer, and Bess was his grandmother, and an iconic Webster County family that helped grow Webster County back in the day. So Craig and Andy, we had a good time, and highly recommend you watch that show. On July the 13th, which, by the way, that June 29th date was our reunion fest last year of 24. On July the 13th, I had Rob Jones, who's the president of the Marshfield Chamber of Commerce. Rob's a business consultant. We got to know him a little bit better. Doing a good job leading the Marshfield Chamber. They just recently started a podcast on Thursday mornings, Good Morning Marshfield or something like that. May have the name wrong, but I recommend that you tune into that, 9 o'clock, I believe it is, and find out what's going on in Marshfield. He and Rachel Andrews, the director of the chamber, have that show. So good to get to know Rob a little bit better. On July the 20th, we had the mayor of Marshfield, Natalie McNish, and Sam Roast, the city administrator, on. Sam's an MHS graduate, of course, and we learned a little bit about what was going on in Marshfield. We talked about the new overpass that went in a couple years ago, and the new sewer project going on out there, and the growth that's anticipated in that area of town, along with everything else going on. They just redid the tennis courts, and there's always something going on. The new building for city offices down here on Marshall, doing some work on the police station, that kind of thing. Long range plan. On August the 3rd, I had John Black back again, and again this time we talked a little bit more about the primary election that was going to be the following Tuesday. Pretty important to our area to know a little bit more about candidates and who might be our leaders coming forward. And so we talked about the governor race and all the other races with John. And the thing I like about John is he is very diplomatic and very, you might say, a statesman. He wants to make sure we hear all sides of an issue and people understand the truth when it comes to whatever it is you're working on. And I appreciate that with John. On August the 17th, I had Sheriff Roy Cole on, and the sheriff got us a little bit of an update on what's going on with the sheriff's department. Got to know Roy a little bit better. And of course, he was elected sheriff in 2008, so he's been sheriff a long time now, and still a young man in my book. So it's always good again to get an update on that. Got a message here. I got to see who this is. Okay. I want to make sure it didn't have something to do with the show. On August the 31st, Marshfield's high school principal, Nikki Thompson, had Nikki on, and what a great young lady to have leading the high school. You know, a Marshfield native, a long Marshfield family, older Marshfield family, you might say, been here a long time. And Nikki understands our community. She's just a remarkable young lady, and I was honored to have her on when I asked. I was hoping she would come, and she did, and we got to know her a little bit better. And that was August 31st of 24. On September the 14th of 24, we had Philip Ragsdale on. Philip, been around here a long time, led Webster Electric for several years, and of course had a 50-year career or whatever it was, something like that, with Webster altogether. And again, another one along with the other guests we had on, we mentioned Wayne Martin, of keeping the lights on for decades for Marshfield. And Wayne Plunkett, our former mayor and service station owner, September the 21st of last year was our guest, and Wayne had a remarkable life of community service in our community. Even though he didn't grow up here, he met Kay, his bride, who was a Marshfield native, and then they lived their has lived their whole life here since. And Wayne served our community as the fire chief, as again the mayor, ran the service station that many people traded with, and just took care of people. On October the 12th of 24, we had Shelby Atkinson. Shelby is the editor of the Marshfield Mail, another Marshfield native. I think grew up and graduated in 2012 from Marshfield, and it was great to have a perspective that's a little different than us old fogies. Had a nice young perspective from someone that loves our community, and we're honored and very thankful that she's in the position she's in to help our community with media when it comes to the newspaper and so forth. Good time with her. On October the 26th, actually, that was another time that I did the podcast by myself, but I did a roving reporter podcast of the campus here. Logan filmed me, and we talked about the various parts of the building, and I think it was a pretty interesting time for people to learn more about the campus, what's going on, and about the history of the campus. On November the 2nd, had Judge Chuck Rupplogle on, and of course Chuck, another longtime Webster County family. Got to know Chuck a little bit better, and we talked about his family and another really good guy that we have in that position that we're very thankful for. On November the 9th, we had the other two judges, the newly appointed Judge Cynthia Black and Judge Justin Evans. Justin Evans, another MHS grad, his mother I went to school with, who was Iwana Robb, if you remember the Robb family. And we got to know both of them a little bit better. Again, we're very thankful to have the three judges, the two associates and circuit judge that we have. I think we have a great group of folks at the courthouse that truly care about our community. On December the 7th, we had Martha Fian Fogelsong and Dr. Rex Newcomb representing the Marshfield Public School Foundation. Marty and Rex, both phenomenal community people, serve in so many various capacities, whether it's church, whether it's school foundation, or the other clubs they're involved in. But for Marty, you know, she's led the choir at the United Methodist Church for, I think, close to 50 years now. So it was great to have them on and learn more about the foundation. And I'm a member of that board as well, and I'm very honored to be a part of that, and have been since I think 1997. Marty, I believe, is the only board member that's been on the board now longer than I have. So we've spent a lot of time together, and appreciated them coming on and giving us an update on teachers grants, scholarships, and the fun run, and all the things that the foundation does to help students and teachers and folks in the community. On December the 14th, we had a really fun time with Rosie Phelan. Rosie is in her 90s, and I think another person that was kind of a little bit ahead of her time. She ended up being a banker in the Springfield community years ago, before a lot of ladies were actually loan officers and bankers. And so she's got a great story. Still has property, has a farm out here not far from me. She has couple of homes here in Marshfield and Springfield both, and she's just a fun person. She was on with Marianne Gregory, and Marianne, her parents own Mary's Variety, so we talked a lot about Mary's Variety. I had a display of some old Mary's Variety items here, and we talked a lot about that. And Rosie still owns some buildings there and around the square, on the square. Fun time. On January the 4th, we had Chris and Scott Davis, and Chris is both of them graduated from in the early 70s from Marshfield. Chris is the chairman of the Route 66 and Webster County Celebration Committee, which we're making plans for 2026, which is the 100th anniversary of the old road. It's also the 250th birthday for our nation. And we talked a lot about that and a lot about learn more about who they were. And Scott had a great career with Burlington Northern, and he races cars and deals in classic cars, and they have a lake house, have a lot of fun. So it was a good time to reminisce with them and get to know them a little bit better too. And then on January the 25th, we had our infamous road trip with Tom Farr. We spent 2 hours out on the road and just had a really good time. Tom's just a remarkable man, and we're going to have him back again because he can still remember a lot about growing up in the 30s and the 40s, and of course coming of age in the 50s, and raising his family in the 60s and 70s, a lifetime career with the post office, knows everybody, knew everybody, had to know believe this, they had to know people's addresses, because who lived there, because you didn't have to put the address on the envelope. You could just put Lyndall, Fraker, Marshfield, Missouri, or Lyndall, Fraker City, or whatever. And it was remarkable what those guys had to know and learn. And then we had a couple weeks break, and we came back with Gene Farr and James Farr and the grandson Jackson on February the 15th. Gene, another one of those silent generation people that were just served their country, served their community, had a lot of health issues in life, but here he is, 90-year-old and still going strong, and a great memory. And we had a really good time with Gene. And then James didn't get a chance to talk too much, so we brought James back on February the 22nd of 2025. And James and I grew up in the same era. He was 2 years ahead of me. This will be his 50th reunion this year. And we talked a lot about Marshfield and growing up. So that is where we are on the podcast. Now, I've taken a lot of time to do this, but there's no reason anyone couldn't go back now and find a date with a name and go back and look at those podcasts. And I think I've had a lot of people ask me to do that, so I just wanted to take the time and do that today. The other thing I want to mention Reunion Fest this year is going to be on July the 5th. It will be the 50th anniversary of the class of 75's graduation. And so they've planned a big event out here in our depot building. I think there's some other classes planning to do something in addition to them. I don't have all that information yet, so I won't mention it yet, but we'll mention it in the shows coming down the road. And then the last thing I wanted to talk about was I want to talk about cancer. I know that some people probably don't want to talk about cancer, and I didn't either until about 3 months ago. And my beloved bride Melanie came down and had and found a spot in her breast, and so it began that journey that so many people are dealing with today. So many people. It's kind of opened my eyes up, and certainly to realize how important health is and how important it is to take care of ourselves and our families, and do some things that may be differently than what we've done. I got a message from Mike Wutke this morning, and Janet Wutke's dealing with cancer as well. And there's just so many people. And I think we're kind of all part of that club now as either the victim or the spouse of the victim. And the good news is for us, it was caught early, and she's going to be fine. But we're going through the chemo right now. We're going through the emotions of, hair loss, of not being able to live our life the way we had prior right now because of certain restrictions or not feeling well or not wanting to be subjected to infections and that kind of thing. So I just know that cancer sucks. It really does. And everybody's probably going to face it in some form or fashion, someone close to them or themselves. And I ask that everybody, we pull together, we stand together as a community. We continue to believe in science when it comes to cancer. I think it's important. We were very fortunate that Dr. Brian Biggers, another Marshfield native, Marshfield grad, someone that has helped so many people with this journey. We want to give a shout out to Brian, and he's been phenomenal. And the one thing that I kind of learned in talking with Brian is you have to trust the science. And some of the stuff out there, in his words, is voodoo. We don't really know what it can do and how it can do to help someone that has this dreaded disease. But we do have research on a lot of the science that's been done, and we look to doctors to save our lives if we have a heart condition, if we have to have an open heart bypass, or if we have to have some kind of surgery. We trust them, and I think we have to trust them when it comes to the treatments that we need when we're stricken with something such as cancer. So my hat's off to all of the researchers out there and all the people that are trying to find a cure. I do believe there is a possibility that we can find a cure. There's been so much advancement made. I think back to the late 60s when my dad was in the Lions Club here in Marshfield. And they had a cancer drive. They had they were doing things with cancer back then, the American Cancer Society, and had drives for research, for funding for research, and whether it was a penny drive, having a penny can at the cash stands at businesses or whatever it might be. And he was a part of that. I remember him bringing home the propaganda, the brochures, the stickers, American Cancer Society. So that's been well over 50 years, maybe close to 60 years since even those campaigns have been going on. It's a long time. And but we also think about the advancement and those of us that have lost loved ones in that time frame, and how the word cancer was an automatic death sentence 50 years ago. It isn't so much now. Certainly is if it's late stage, yes, we understand that. But in the early stages, we know it's curable. And so my plea to you is do your checks, do your colonoscopies, do your mammograms, maybe do them twice what they say you should do, or do them 10 years earlier than they say you should. I don't know. But I trust the science. We have to make sure we catch this stuff early because it's all treatable and it's all curable. Melanie's going to be cured. The oncologist told us that. But it's still a rough time to go through, and we still have to deal with that. And she'll always have that word cancer attached to herself for the rest of her life. So I pray for everyone that is dealing with this dreaded disease. I know we have many other community members, some very young, that are dealing with it. Let's all pray for them. There's power in prayer. And again, let's be positive and be supportive. And for God's sakes, let's try to keep social media to a decent format where we don't have to upset people all the time. It's really not necessary. So with that, I'm going to end today's show. Thank you for giving me time to do this today. If you tune in and you find it boring or don't need it, that's fine. But I do appreciate the support, and we appreciate the show. We appreciate the people that come on. It's not easy to take time out of your weekend to come on and do this. But I think down the road, we'll appreciate having this information for future generations. I have no sponsors. I don't spend any time talking about sponsors. That's not my goal. It costs money to do this. It costs me money out of my pocket. I give Logan $20 to help me. And so I'm proud of that, and that's how it's going to stay. But we appreciate your support. And if anybody would like to come on and talk about their life or the history that they may have of Marshfield or Northern Webster County or anything they really want to talk about, I'd love to have you. Just holler at me. We enjoy doing it, and we enjoy sharing with other people. With that, I'm going to leave you. Thank you all. Have a great weekend. And I can tell you that Webster County's Lincoln Days is March the 22nd here in the gym. And regardless of your politics, the governor of Missouri is going to be there. We encourage you, if you want to see the governor, say hi to the governor, or tell him what you think. Come to Lincoln Days and tell him. He's a good guy, and I think he'll listen. So with that, we'll leave it with you. Thank you. Have a great weekend.